You've been told your entire life that being a good person is your strength, that your kindness makes you valuable, that your patience earns respect, that your willingness to help, to listen, to tolerate makes you admirable. But look closer. Look at how people actually treat you. Not what they say, what they do. Because in the real world, underneath politeness, underneath social masks, value is not assigned based on goodness. It is assigned based on usefulness. And this is where the illusion begins to crack. You are not respected because you are good. You are tolerated because you are convenient. Convenient to call when someone needs help. Convenient to ignore when they don't. Convenient to keep around because you don't resist. And the moment you are no longer useful in that role, watch how quickly your goodness becomes invisible. This is the part most people refuse to confront because it threatens their identity. You've built your self-image around being reliable, understanding, patient. You believe that makes you strong. You believe it makes you morally superior. But the social hierarchy does not reward moral narratives. It rewards leverage. And if you have none, you become background noise. Think about it carefully. When was the last time someone truly respected you for your kindness alone? Not appreciated, not thanked, respected. There's a difference, and you feel it even if you've never named it. Appreciation is soft, temporary, disposable. Respect is sharp. It changes how people behave around you. Respect makes people hesitate before crossing you. It makes them measure their words. It makes them aware that access to you is not guaranteed. Kindness on its own does none of that. In fact, uncontrolled kindness signals something else entirely. It signals predictability. And predictability in social dynamics is weakness. Because humans, at their core, are not wired for fairness. They're wired for survival. Your brain, their brain, every brain in the room is constantly scanning one thing: who has power and who doesn't, who can impose consequences and who can't. This isn't morality, this is biology. In evolutionary terms, the individual who gives without resistance, who tolerates without boundaries, who stays available regardless of treatment, is not seen as virtuous. They are seen as safe to exploit. Not consciously most of the time, but instinctively. And that instinct shapes behavior faster than logic ever could. That's why the same people who call you such a nice person will also interrupt you, overlook you, deprioritize you. Not because they hate you, because your behavior has trained them to. You taught them that access to you has no cost, that your time is always available, that your approval is easy to earn. And anything that is easy to earn is never deeply valued. This is the silent contract you entered without realizing it. You offered consistency without conditions, and in return, you received casual treatment disguised as familiarity. Now, here's the uncomfortable question. Are you actually a good person, or have you simply made yourself easy to use? Sit with that, because your answer determines everything that follows. Most people will reject this idea instantly. They'll defend their identity. They'll cling to the belief that goodness should be enough. But you're still here, which means part of you already sees the pattern. Part of you already knows something is off. So let's go deeper. There are only two roles in any social interaction, no matter how subtle. The one who sets the terms and the one who adapts to them. The one who creates pressure and the one who absorbs it. The one who can walk away and the one who stays. Which one are you? Be honest. And if you're starting to see the answer clearly, type this in the comments: I refuse to be convenient. Not for validation, but as a declaration. Because the moment you see the game, you can no longer pretend you're not playing it. And what comes ahead will force you to question everything you thought made you good. Now we strip the illusion further, Because what you're about to understand is this: convenience is not just how others see you, it is a role you have been conditioned to perform. You weren't born this way, you were trained. Trained through subtle rewards and punishments that shaped your behavior long before you were aware of it. When you were agreeable, you were accepted. When you complied, you were praised. When you sacrificed your needs, you were labeled mature, kind, easy to be around. And every time you asserted yourself too strongly, there was friction, disapproval, silence, withdrawal. So your mind adapted. It learned that safety comes from being non-threatening, that belonging comes from being useful, that conflict risks rejection. And slowly, without realizing it, you built an identity around minimizing resistance. This is not morality, this is conditioning, and it runs deeper than your conscious thoughts. Because human beings are not driven primarily by logic, they are driven by emotional memory, patterns that feel familiar, patterns that feel safe. And once your behavior becomes predictable in that way, people stop evaluating you. They start using you. This is where the power dynamic locks in. Because the moment someone knows how you will respond, they no longer need to respect you. They only need to manage you. Understand this clearly. Respect exists where uncertainty exists, where there is a possibility of resistance, where there is a line that, if crossed, triggers consequences. Without that, you are not a person to be respected, you are a resource to be accessed. This is why the most liked individuals are often the least respected. They optimize for approval. They smooth every edge. They remove every friction point. They become easy. And in doing so, they erase the very tension that creates authority. Because authority is not built on being liked. It is built on controlled unpredictability, on the quiet understanding that you are not always available, not always agreeable, not always compliant. This creates psychological weight. It forces people to pay attention, to calibrate their behavior around you, to think twice. And thinking twice is the beginning of respect. Now here is where most people fail. They hear this and they overcorrect. They try to become aggressive, confrontational, dominant in obvious ways. But that is not power. That is insecurity wearing armor. True power is far more subtle. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is felt. It shows up in what you tolerate and what you don't, in how easily you can withdraw your attention without explanation. Because attention is the currency you've been giving away for free. And the moment you start controlling it, everything shifts. Conversations change. People become more careful. Their tone adjusts. Their behavior tightens. Not because you demanded it, but because you altered the underlying dynamic. You removed the guarantee. This is what creates tension, and tension is what creates value. Think about it in primal terms. In any environment, the individual who is always available, always agreeable, always predictable is not seen as a threat. And anything that is not a threat is not taken seriously, not feared, not respected. But the one who chooses carefully, who speaks less but with precision, who does not react instantly, who can walk away without chasing, that individual creates uncertainty, and uncertainty forces attention. Now answer this honestly. When someone delays replying to you, when they seem slightly out of reach, when they are not fully available, do you value their attention more or less? You already know the answer. So why would it be different for you? This is the inversion. The moment you stop trying to prove your value and start controlling access to it, people begin to assign value on their own. Not because you told them to, but because their mind fills in the gap. Scarcity creates perception, and perception shapes reality. So the question becomes, are you willing to let go of being liked to be taken seriously? Because you cannot have both at the same level. One requires softness, the other requires edges. And most people are too afraid to develop edges. They fear losing people. They fear being misunderstood. They fear standing alone. But what they don't realize is this: they are already alone, surrounded by people who benefit from them, but do not truly see them, do not truly respect them, do not truly consider the cost of losing them. That is not connection, that is consumption. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. So now we move to the next layer, where control becomes intentional, where behavior becomes strategy, where you stop reacting and start shaping outcomes. But before we go there, answer this: are you ready to be respected, even if it makes you less comfortable? If the answer is yes, type this: I choose respect over approval. Because what comes next requires you to act differently than 99% of people.
Now we enter the part most people avoid, because this is where awareness becomes responsibility. You can no longer hide behind ignorance. You can no longer say, "That's just how I am." From this point forward, every interaction becomes a choice. Every response becomes calculated. Every silence becomes intentional. This is where you stop being shaped and start shaping. Understand something critical. Power is not about dominating every situation. It is about controlling the frame in which the situation exists. The frame determines who leads and who follows. And right now, in most of your interactions, you are not controlling the frame. You are stepping into one that was already set and adapting to it. That is why you feel the subtle imbalance. That is why you feel overlooked, interrupted, deprioritized. Because you are entering conversations as a participant, not as a force. And forces do not ask for space. They take it. Not loudly, not aggressively, but undeniably. The shift begins with something deceptively simple: delay. Not hesitation, not uncertainty, deliberate delay. When someone speaks, you don't rush to respond. You let the silence stretch just enough to create weight. You force them to sit with what they said. You make them feel your presence without filling the space. Silence, when used correctly, is pressure, and pressure reveals hierarchy. The one who breaks silence first often concedes it. Now think about your current pattern. How quickly do you reply to messages? How quickly do you agree? How quickly do you fill awkward gaps? Every one of those behaviors is broadcasting the same signal. I am available. I am ready. I am waiting. And waiting is a submissive position. The moment you stop doing that, the dynamic shifts. You become less readable, less predictable, and therefore more significant. But this is only the surface, because control is not just about how you respond, it's about what you reward. People repeat behaviors that get results. This is basic conditioning. If someone disrespects you and still gets your attention, you just trained them. If someone cancels on you and you immediately accommodate, you just trained them. If someone speaks over you and you quietly accept it, you just trained them. You are constantly teaching people how to treat you, not through words, through patterns. And patterns are far more powerful than intentions. This is why being a good person fails, because it relies on the assumption that others will act fairly. But fairness is not a driving force in human behavior. Incentives are. Outcomes are. Emotional rewards are. So, if disrespect has no consequence, it becomes normalized. Not because people are evil, because they are efficient. They move toward what works. And right now, your tolerance is what works. That ends here. From this point forward, Your attention becomes selective. Your reactions become rare. Your approval becomes difficult to earn. Not impossible, but not automatic. This creates a new environment around you, one where people must adjust or lose access. And losing access is the only consequence that truly matters. Because most people don't fear confrontation, they fear exclusion. They fear being cut off from value, from attention, from presence. That is leverage. Not anger, not aggression, control. Cold, precise control. But there is a warning here, because once you begin operating this way, people will notice. Some will resist. They will test you, push boundaries, try to pull you back into your old role. Not because they hate you, because they were benefiting from you. And when benefits are removed, people react. This is where most fail. They retreat, they soften, they apologize for changing, and in that moment, they lose all progress. Because consistency is what establishes a new identity, not intensity, consistency. You don't need to be extreme. You need to be stable, unmoved, unshaken by temporary discomfort. Because discomfort is the price of repositioning yourself in the hierarchy. And if you can't bear that pressure, you will fall back into convenience. So now the question becomes sharper. When the moment comes, when someone expects the old version of you, will you break the pattern or return to it? Which side are you on? If you're still here, you already feel the shift happening. So anchor it. Type this in the comments. I control what I allow. Because that is the line most people never cross. And once you cross it, you are no longer easy to use. You become something else entirely. Something harder to access, harder to predict, harder to replace. And in the final part, you'll understand what that makes you in the eyes of others, and why at that level, you don't need to chase respect anymore. It comes to you.
Now you begin to see the full structure, not just behavior, but positioning, not just reactions, but identity. Because at the highest level, this was never about being good or bad. It was about control over how you are perceived and what role you occupy in the minds of others. And most people never reach this level. They spend their lives reacting, adjusting, hoping that if they give enough, tolerate enough, prove enough, they will finally be valued. But value in the real world is never given to those who ask for it. It is assigned to those who define it. This is the final inversion. You do not wait for people to recognize your worth. You create conditions where they have no choice but to. Not through force, through structure, through presence, through the quiet, unspoken understanding that access to you is earned, not assumed. At this level, something interesting happens. You stop explaining yourself. You stop over-communicating. You stop trying to be understood by people who have not earned that level of access. Because explanation is often a subtle form of seeking approval, and approval is the currency of the convenient. You are no longer operating on that currency. You operate on something else. Scarcity, clarity, boundaries that are not negotiated but demonstrated. And when people encounter this version of you, their behavior changes automatically. They become more careful with their words, more deliberate with their actions. They notice your absence. They value your presence. Not because you demanded it, but because you removed the assumption that you will always be there. This is where respect stabilizes, not as something you chase, but as something that follows you. Now understand this clearly. This transformation is not comfortable. You will lose people. Some will drift away quietly. Others will challenge you directly. They will say you've changed. They will say you've become distant, cold, different. They are correct, but not in the way they think. You haven't become worse. You've become selective. And selection creates hierarchy. For the first time, you are no longer available to everyone, and that alone will disqualify those who only valued your convenience. Let them go, because what replaces them is different. People who understand value, people who recognize boundaries, people who do not confuse kindness with weakness. But even here, there is a final layer most people miss. Respect is not maintained by occasional strength. It is maintained by consistent standards. One moment of weakness, one return to old patterns, one instance where you allow convenience to override clarity, and the entire structure begins to crack. Because people are always watching for consistency. They are always testing, even subtly, not maliciously, instinctively. And your consistency tells them everything they need to know. This is why power is not something you turn on and off. It is something you embody, quietly, continuously, without performance, without announcement. You don't need to remind people who you are. They already know, based on what you allow. So now we arrive at the truth most people spend their lives avoiding. You were never disrespected because you were too kind. You were disrespected because your kindness had no edge, and no consequence, no boundary. And without those, it was never seen as strength, only as access. But now you know. Now you see the structure behind the illusion. Now you understand the game most people are unconsciously playing. So the final question is simple. What will you do with this awareness? Will you return to comfort and remain convenient, or will you accept the tension and become someone who defines their own value? Choose carefully, because once you've seen this, you cannot go back to not knowing. And those who truly understand this are rare. They move differently. They think differently. They are treated differently, not because they asked for it, but because they became impossible to ignore and impossible to use. If you've reached this point, you're no longer part of the unaware majority. You've stepped into a smaller circle, a sharper one. So mark it, not for me, for yourself. Type this in the comments. I define my own value. And before you leave, answer this one final question. What is one rule, one behavior, or one boundary you will change starting today? Write it. Commit to it. Because knowledge without action is just another form of convenience. And you're done being that.